Professor Sowell, so good to see you again. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Great pleasure to have you. All right, I'm going to start with a quote of yours from the Thomas Sowell Reader, which is a gem. I have to say it's a wonderful collection, not only of your columns, but of longer essays and such. But this sort of reminded me of what's happening with these Wall Street protests. And this is what you said from the Thomas Sowell Reader. This is the age of complaining classes, whether they are lawyers, community activists, radical feminists, race hustlers, or other squeaking wheels looking for oil. No society ever thrived because it had a large and growing class of parasites living off of those who produce. Is what we're hearing with these Wall Street protests just from this complaining class?
Oh, absolutely. I can't imagine when I was their age that I would have enough money that I could afford to hang around in parks for weeks on end, not doing any work and not bringing in any income.
Well, and the incredible thing is, a lot of them are there to complain about capitalism, and you see them on cell phones, not to mention an iPhone. I mean, you know. Well, yeah, go ahead.
No, but the thing that strikes me about them, wherever they're interviewed, they are incoherent. They will toss out a few scraps of rhetoric, and they feel that they've said something. But they can't tell you exactly what they want. They can't tell you what they're really complaining about, other than that the world is not built to their specifications.
Other than that, they do have this sort of class warfare thing going. And to a large extent, we are in the midst of something that was at least encouraged, if not created, by the current administration. Let me just play a collection of sound bites from the president that kind of lead to that same mentality that we see at a lot of these protests.
Middle-class families shouldn't pay higher rates than millionaires or billionaires. Millionaires and billionaires to pay their fair share. To pay a little more, ask the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations to pay their fair share. And by the way, I don't mind being called a warrior for the working class. You guys need somebody fighting for you.
Okay, and we could go on, Professor. I mean, you know the sort of class warfare. Right? Now, there are so many points that were spoken of by the president there that he puts out as though they were absolutes that I'm sure you take issue with.
Absolutely. First of all, the whole notion of the fair share, I'm still waiting for someone to tell me, what is the fair share? Is that 20%, 40%, 60%, 80, any number? Or even to give me some principle by which you might determine. And really, it reminds me of the old question asked to Samuel Gompers, the legendary labor leader, when they said, what does organized labor want? And he said in one word, more. And when they say fair share, they mean more. That's all they mean.
And what is the fair share of taxing the rich if we find out that, in fact, in New York State, 40% of all the tax revenue comes from the top 1%? How much more than 40% do they want to squeeze out of that top 1%?
What makes this all sort of so false is that as you raise the taxes beyond some point, people who have high incomes simply send the income somewhere else, or else they go somewhere else. And so you can raise the tax rates as high as you want. The true millionaires and billionaires can have that money shipped to China or Germany or wherever, electronically inside of a minute. No. So they're not going to actually end up paying it. The people who are going to end up paying it is the guy who owns a local barber shop, the guy who owns a hardware store or restaurant. He can't move to China. And who will pay the highest price of all are people who are looking for jobs, because the jobs will now be overseas where that money is, and they can't just hop a plane and go overseas and take the jobs.
It's always the guy in the middle that gets squeezed the most, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So the question comes, if it's so obvious as what you're stating and what we've seen in the evidence from the stats, where do these people get these ideas? Where that we're all worse off because of capitalism? And there's a little hint of that in your book that I picked out as well. You say no small part of our social problems today come from miseducated degree holders who have nothing to contribute to the wealth of society, but who are full of demands and indignation and resentment of those who are producing. Is that where these ideas come from?
Yes, and I think the education is pathetic. And when I see these people on whom I guess probably $100,000 at least have been expended in their education, counting the public schools, I wonder what kind of return is there when they are unable to put together a few coherent sentences to say what it is that they don't like specifically and what it is that they think ought to be done and why.
By the way, you're lowballing the cost. My daughter's at BC. It's now about $60,000 a year. So all told, it's going to be a lot more than that.
Good grief.
Yeah, that's just the beginning. But the legitimate issues that some of these people are talking about down at these Wall Street protests, one of them would be Wall Street bailouts. You're not in favor of those, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm not in favor of bailouts. But I'm not in favor of bailouts in general, because what they mean is that some people who live within their means are then forced to subsidize people who didn't live within their means. And that's true not only at the level between in a given country. It's true of people in Germany now being asked to sacrifice because the Greek government had all kinds of reckless spending, and now the bills are coming due.
Professor, we had a series here a couple of weeks ago called Entitlement Nation. There's so many things that Americans now think they are entitled to because of government largesse. Everything from health care to food stamps, houses, even jobs. How do we get out of that?
That's going to be a very tough one because the media, the politics, and the educational system promote the idea that you're entitled to something. I mean, it should seem obvious. Society is not entitled to anything. I mean, we can't even get the food that we need without working for it. So when you say someone's entitled to it, you mean that somebody else has to pay for what you want. And unless that attitude is turned around, you're going to have a situation where some people try to do more and more of that, and those who have money will simply send their money somewhere else, which they're already doing to some extent, by the way. The United States is now sending more money abroad than the people abroad are sending here. And so we're creating jobs in Europe and Asia and who knows where else. While there are millions of Americans unemployed. $1.3
trillion, that's how much money corporations have overseas, and it's stuck there. And it's not just jobs that we are now guaranteeing, it's the price that we get paid for jobs, the salaries. This is something that came out from Brian Deese. He's one of President Obama's economic advisors. He said one of the ideas in the American Jobs Act, which of course was just defeated, but is for wage insurance. This is what the president wanted, which basically says if you lose a job that pays at a higher salary, the government will come in and pay a portion if you need to take a job that initially starts you at a lower salary. So they're even guaranteeing a certain amount of money that you get paid.
Oh, absolutely. But the idea that the government somehow can do wonderful things for you when the government creates no wealth whatsoever, it simply takes from someone else. And then someone else will either eventually send his money somewhere else, or he himself will just slacken off. There's no point in it beyond a certain point. This is not a new idea. This happened in the fading days of the Roman Empire.
Well, are there any entitlements? I mean, now we hear that health care is a right of Americans. Is it?
No. I don't know. You can't. You know, it costs money to train doctors. It costs money to produce drugs. Somebody's going to have to pay for that. And if you think that you can simply live off someone else, you end up with a situation like they have in many other countries where you can't get a doctor. You have to wait and wait. Since I recently had 3 operations, I feel this very keenly. You know, it was 5 hours from the time I saw the first specialist to the time I was on the operating table. You go to a country where the government controls the medical system, you're going to wait days to see a doctor, weeks to see a specialist, and months to get an operation. I doubt seriously if I would have lasted that long. But people think that because they're entitled, that's the way we ought to go. And of course, what they're going to do is destroy what is really the finest medical system in the world.
By the way, I'm glad you recovered fully. Thank you. Thank God for that, and thank God for our health system. But it's not only individual entitlements, it's also corporate entitlements. A lot of corporations now feel that they're entitled to something. You look at what happened with Solyndra, by the way. There seem to be some corporate entitlement feelings there, right?
My gosh, I can't see why an organization, I can understand wanting to do something to help flesh and blood human beings. I see no reason whatever to help corporations.
And yet it goes on. And the thing about Solyndra that we're now investigating is whether or not corporations that invested, or individuals, rich individuals who made a risky bet on a company that was quite risky, deserve to be paid back in part by taxpayers. I mean, that's extraordinary.
It is. Unfortunately, we've set precedents for that by bailing out people who invested money in Mexico and were about to lose it some years ago, and the federal government steps in. You know, people talk as if we're rescuing the poor. But once you start this thing, the money goes to the people who have clout in Washington, and that's seldom the poor.
By the way, we did have Clinton's welfare reform that he did with the Republican Congress, so it is possible to go in the other direction,
yes.
right?
It is, and then we can just keep our fingers crossed that we have an administration after 2012 that will understand that.
All right, Professor Sowell, particularly about race, which is a charged topic in America. Who solves racial conflicts better, businesses or the government?
Oh, heavens. The government's role is I don't think that you have to depend upon either institution, that individuals have to work on that themselves. I saw something, however, just recently. I came across an old issue of the New York Times which said that the black-white income difference narrowed during the 1980s. And of course, more recently, we've learned that the black-white income difference has spread. So we're saying that despite the rhetoric, the blacks were better off under the Reagan administration than they are under the Obama administration. But you'd never guess that from listening to the media.
You know, you quote Frederick Douglass, who spoke a couple of hundred years ago about what we can identify with today. He was asked, "What shall we do with the Negro?" This is back in the 1800s, mid-1800s. He said, "I have had but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Do nothing with us." In other words, the more the government gets involved to try to fix things, the worse off we are.
Yeah, because they don't understand that employers and employees both benefit from the transactions. And if you step in to help one side, the other side will make fewer transactions. You can jack up the minimum wage and people will lose their jobs. You know, you can come to the aid of tenants with rent control laws, but then you have housing shortages. Politicians don't think beyond the initial stage. If it looks good and right in front of their nose, they think it's a good idea.
Well, there are all kinds of things that I'm sure you're then against, like these minorities. By the way, you have a chapter called Minority, and I love that because my wife hates that word minority. She said there's nothing minor about me. So just to categorize people as minorities is in itself insulting, isn't it?
It is, because what they mean is people they can feel sorry for. You don't. Many years ago, there was I was doing a research project, and I was told there was money that I could use without going into the project's money to hire people in the summertime if they're minorities. And I said, wonderful. There's a Jewish lady up at Princeton who wants to help me on the project, but I don't have any money to pay her. And they said, Jews are not a minority. Well, then, what that means is they're people that you think you have to feel sorry for.
But and of course nobody's helped at all when you feel sorry for somebody. Pity doesn't really help at all.
No.
The final question, we got to wrap this up. But as to what we do now, you have a great quote, which is that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. I mean, that's basic in economics. But as we look for trade-offs in terms of moving away from the incredible intrusion that the government has had, not only in our economy but in our personal lives over the past several years. How do we do it? How do we go about backpedaling from where we are?
You elect somebody who has a totally different philosophy, who will get the government out of various things, so that the people who can privately reach their own mutual accommodations. The government plans that we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years, and even further, have been a disaster. They've almost invariably made things worse.
And I do have to ask, finally, there is an African-American running for president, Herman Cain. Now, Barack Obama and Herman Cain, who's the better role model?
Oh, Herman Cain, because he actually worked and then did say something. You have one man who really had a privileged upbringing and who never actually had responsibility for anything before he was suddenly president of the United States. You have another man who grew up in a low-income family and worked his own way up, and who has run things. So there's no question in my mind as to who would be a better president.
The book is called The Thomas Sowell Reader. If you like what you heard tonight, you want to pick up this book and buy it. There's a lot more wisdom in here. Good to see you, Professor Sowell. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.